caustic astrologer.
Oh, well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining me this morning. This is Chrystal Lynn, Cowgirl Astrologer, and I have somebody very special joining me this morning. I'm very excited to announce. I'm going to announce Steve Judd. He has over 30 years experience as an astrologer, and every single day he gives us awesome insights into what is going on up in the sky, and we know right now that we are having some incredibly epic events in history. So, hello, Steve. How are you this morning? Or this evening for you?
Good evening. Yeah, still alive, still coping, not dribbling yet.
So, what can you tell us about what is going on right now? We are in the middle of, or the last of 7 Uranus-Pluto squares. Pretty crazy stuff. What are your thoughts?
The first thing, I did a lecture on this here a couple of days ago. The thing that's different, this happened before in 1929 to 1933, at the time when Uranus in Aries, much as it is now, was then square Pluto in Cancer. And then, of course, it was different. We saw massive unemployment, poverty, depression, banks spiraling out of control, and the rise of the right wing around the world. The big difference between then and now is that then there was no global communication system. Now we have artificial intelligence, AI, the internet, and instant media communication of everything that's going on worldwide. It's interesting that the internet was never predicted. It was random. No one controls the internet, and that's a great leveler, I think.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it gives us insights into things we've never had, availability to before.
It's amazing. It's watching the internet being born in the last 20 years. It's like watching the birth pains. Initially, of course, there's all the pornography and the conspiracy theory stuff and all the dross and all the crap, but gradually it's evolving. It's becoming not a separate intelligence, but it's evolving, and there's a growing sense of a more conscious use of it, I think, as opposed to just titillation or entertainment. So I think it's a really important tool in long-term human evolution, and it does give me hope for the future, I think.
Yeah, we've got Neptune and Pisces in the backdrop that has to give this a completely different signature than it did, so many years ago. When this happened before, you said in 1929? What is your, thoughts on that energy coming through in the middle of this?
On the one hand, I have found Neptune in Pisces, when dealing with it in clients' charts in the last few years, to be a real pain in the backside. However, I also remember how much I disliked Neptune being in Aquarius, right? So yeah. I'm okay with Neptune in Pisces-ish. On the negative side, Neptune in Pisces is really amplifying the poor me syndrome, the victims and martyrs, and no one can help me because I'm helpless. And that's globally, regardless of what culture or society you live in. It's also really striking home the need to change the way we look at alcohol, drugs, religion, all the ways that we sort of affect our consciousness. The negative side of this can be seen in the fracking and the ruining of the earth through oil pillaging. The positive side of this can be seen as part of the ongoing consciousness revolution, where the escalation of empathy and intuition is gathering pace. Humanity is evolving at an accelerated rate. And I think that the Uranus-Pluto square of the last 4 or 5 years has been truly representative of this accelerated evolution. It's no longer a straight line graph, it's an escalating graph. And when it goes up like that, well, let me just put it like this, succinctly and shortly. When I was born, there was 2.1 billion people on this planet. That was 60 years ago. There's now 7 billion. Population has more than tripled since I've been alive. At the same time, technology has also accelerated exponentially. When I was born, there was these little boxes with black and white moving figures in them, and now I'm downloading .wav files and everything bouncing off of satellites galore. You name it, we've got it. But it's not just technology and population, because if it were just technology and population, we're heading into what I see as the cyborg or the Borg mentality. Mm-hmm. It's also spirituality. Since the ensuing discovery of Chiron and the acceptance of a much more holistic paradigm and the willingness of people to see things at the cause, not the symptoms, to place themselves at cause, to take responsibility for themselves and the way they feel and their lifestyle, instead of just eating the processed food and believing the television and the religion, then, yeah, that's gathering pace as well. Mm-hmm. So if you put them all together, technology, spirituality, population, and you project forward to that point when that escalating graph curve hits prime vertical, then only one or two things can happen. It can either crash in on itself and then go back the other way, which perhaps happened 10 to 12,000 years ago, we don't know, or you can go outside the parameters of the graph. And that, I think, involves a global change of consciousness, an enhancement of consciousness, so that we all become much more naturally intuitive and sensitive to what's going on around us. And that should then preclude people carrying guns or bombs or harboring ill intent without everybody knowing it just by their vibe. I think we've got to evolve. We're the only species that's ever existed that can anticipate futures. I presume you're familiar with Terence McKenna, or some of his work anyway. He said very clearly that human history represents such a radical break to the systems of biological organization that preceded it, but it must be the response to some type of attractor or dwell point in the future that's pulling us home, that's pulling us forward, attracting us to evolve. And the thing as astrologers is that we can't predict what's going to happen, but we're pretty good with timings. And if you look at the large scale, if you look at the movements of Uranus, Pluto, mixed in with the big eclipses, you can see how since the 1930s, through the late 50s and mid-60s, into the late 80s, then the late 90s, and then now, how everything is escalating astrologically. The beautiful thing is, then, is that when you and I started doing this, there weren't computers. You had to draw horoscopes by hand.
Wow.
Now there's computers. So we can suddenly fast forward 20,000 years or back 20,000 years. And of course, because I want the time that I'm living in to be the golden age, as everyone else who's ever lived wants their time to be the golden age, nevertheless, looking forward or backwards, I can't see a time of such astrological intensity as the last 60, 70, 80, 85 years, and for the next few years, for at least 5,000 years.
Wow.
So we're obviously at some critical juncture point or nexus point in history. And maybe it's the end of history, you know, which is not going to be necessarily a bad thing. Then.
Well, if it's not the end of history, you know.
Not the end of the world.
Yeah.
Not the end of society or civilization, just the end of history, just the end of the patriarchy.
I like that. That's interesting. That is very interesting. Well, and you know, as we're at this peak right now as we speak, and this is the last of the 7 squares, what can we take with us personally? How can we take advantage of this? What could we be looking for in our own personal lives to get the most out of this and not be unaware of what's going on? Prepare ourselves, you to take advantage of the positive sides of this.
Right. So as above, so below. Yeah. So the microcosm reflects the macrocosm, etc., etc. What we're seeing in the outside world reflects into our personal lives. The Pluto in Capricorn is transforming the need of the global corporate, the global national, the large collective faceless group. It's transforming the idea of national and corporate identity, structure, and boundary. By doing that, it's forcing it into making some difficult decisions. At the same time, it's facing off with Uranus, the change bringer, in Aries, which is all about me, right?
Mm-hmm.
No one else.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of about me stuff going on out there.
Right. So translate that from the global into the individual, and it's about the rights of the individual versus the needs of the corporate or the global state. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's developed in this last 3 years, 4 years, has been the growing sense of self-awareness and individuality and basic human rights, I think. There's been a growth in intelligence, and I don't mean smartness or cleverness, I mean intelligence. And genuine people are truly trying to behave in a more sensitive and compassionate way without becoming too wussy about it. So,
well, and I come from the Pluto and Virgo generation, so we're kind of lost in the middle of being raised with a lot of structure, and now all of a sudden looking at our lives and saying, is this all there is? Can we recreate ourselves? What is our part in this in the future? And I feel that change going on, but it's so foreign.
Well, I'll tell you, after 3 decades of study, about 3 years ago, I finally made a conscious choice, right? I stopped calling astrology it, and I started calling astrology she. At which point, everything changed. I started recognizing certain patterns. You can see sub-generations of people. For example, Uranus-Pluto generation, Uranus-Pluto in Virgo generation. There's a sub-generation of them with Saturn conjunct Chiron, opposite Uranus-Pluto. There's a sub-generation of that with Jupiter square the whole lot, somewhere around May, June 66, I think. And even there's an even more minor sub-generation of people with Mercury and Mars involved in that giant T-square also. So one of the things I've taken on board, now this is one of my strong ones at the moment, the North Node always came to astrology with the Hindu/Sikh connotation of having to do with karma and reincarnation. I believed that for 30 years. Once I accepted the femininity and the spirituality of astrology and accepted it as a divine influence, if you like, to my own relationship with divinity, I realized that actually karma and reincarnation is just based on a philosophy that's been based on thousands of years of poverty, and the only thing they can aspire to is a better life next time. Whereas I live in the Western world, and I want it now, please. I'm not interested in next life. I want it now, right?
Yep.
So therefore, I stopped thinking about it in terms of karma and lifetime cycles. Instead, I just thought of slices of now, every moment of now sending vibes into the future, and instead of seeing it as karma and reincarnation, I started seeing it as mission statement. Reason why you volunteered to come to planet Earth at this time. What your purpose is, why you chose to be here. And the horoscope is a very good tool for defining your mission statement. But first you have to wake up and remember that you volunteered to come here. That's where astrologers are so useful. We act as catalysts and wake-up calls for people. Astrology's outlived every culture, every religion. It's outlived everything. It's always been there. It always will be.
Yeah, we have such an amazing, like you said, with all the information that we have, people are able to access, the deep studies and have the privilege to listen to people like you that have come out to teach us you know, that we've never had that chance before. So, you know, knowledge is abounding.
I used to say in the 80s and 90s that on my epitaph, on my gravestone, I wanted it to be said that he wanted astrology to be taught in schools. Because I believe that if astrology were taught in schools, that within 2 generations we would see an end to both warfare and religion.
Wow.
Of course, with the internet, as a joke, 2.5 years ago, someone said, why don't you do a video? And I thought, well, I've got the technology, why not play? Here I am, 2.5 years later. Well, you know what it's like.
Oh, yeah.
What an amazing world we live in. And right now, here we are, end of the Uranus-Pluto cycles. The next one's not till 2072, and I'm not going to be here then. And we've got we're right smack in the middle of eclipse season. The eclipse on the 4th of April is bringing to an end Uranus-Pluto and the last 4 years. Because so much has happened around around that period of the early to mid cardinal signs in the last 3 or 4 years. And I truly believe this eclipse on the 4th of April is the closure for a lot of people of all the intensity and extremes of the last 2.5 to 3 years. The eclipse in a couple of days' time. I've been struggling with it. I've been thinking, well, it's not touching anything, but it's in the last part of the last degree of the last sign. It's the equinox about 12 hours afterwards. It's about endings. You know, Uranus square Pluto, there's a lot of conclusion. Saturn standing still now, there's a lot of conclusion. These 2 eclipses bring closure. They also bring fresh starts afterwards, but they bring closure. And you have to look at all around the world, whether you're looking at economic, political, financial, or just personal. A lot of people are going through closure. A lot of things are moving on, things and people. It's an extremely intense time, and in more than 30% of all the readings I'm doing, I'm saying to people, but by the time you're into middle of April 2015, 60% of this year's challenges are over.
Wow. Well, that'll be nice. We have been through it. Now, how about, what are your thoughts on with Saturn and Scorpio coming back for its final visit? How can we prepare for that? What should we be looking for in our, again, you know, I always ask in my personal life first because I can't look outside until I make that change within, you know, and then I can hopefully understand what's going on around me. But what's your thought?
I was born with Saturn in Scorpio, so I'm comfortable with him. It's interesting. I don't know how it was in your country, but in our country, the day that Saturn moved into Scorpio was the day that the celebrity paedophile ring stuff broke in this country 2.5 years ago. There's now been multiple exposures and arrests across the board, with many more to come. And a lot of stuff around child abuse, paedophilia, sex crime stuff has really come out big time. In other countries like Australia, Indonesia, and I believe also America, it's not been there's been some celebrity stuff, but it's been as much towards religion as well. There's a difference in that most of the priests in this country are allowed to marry, so they don't go interfering with children. Bit controversial that, but nevertheless, Saturn going back into Scorpio, he's going back to clear up a little bit of old baggage. There's a few more trials to come, a few more people to be arrested, a few more confessions to come, and then he's going to move into Sagittarius, and we're going to see a lot more prosecutions for child abuse from the religious side of things, but we're also going to see Saturn in his guise as the Grim Reaper with the scythe and the skeleton and the cowl. He's going to have a good look at these fundamentalists. And at the end of the day, there'll be just one fundamentalist left. And Saturn's coming, so I'm not too worried because he's got them firmly in his sights. It's inevitable. As attendances in churches worldwide go down, so fundamentalism will correspondingly rise in the short term. But viewed over a long period, viewed historically, whenever this has happened, it doesn't normally last more than a decade or two before it's either wiped out and eradicated or assimilated. Nevertheless, there are some nutcases out in the Middle East that definitely do need dealing with. And perhaps part of the Uranus-Pluto square is humanity asking itself, well, what do we do with our killers and our murderers and our rapists? What do we do with the people who are genuinely insane? Do we just offer them care and compassion? Or are there other options? Big questions.
Yeah.
You know, as astrologers, we can offer opinion from an astrological perspective, but you do get, as you know, you're going to get a bit of criticism.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think, you know, one of the things that I get is a very common thread in my readings are people wanting to take their own lives back and not be underneath anybody else, finding their own creative freedom and creating their own lives. Is that going to be possible for people to actually, you know, with the internet? I think it gives us a lot of possibilities, but I see people really wanting to take their health into their own hands, take their spirituality into their own hands, and take their way of making an income into their own creative hands. Any thoughts on what you're seeing in that?
Thing is, though, if we all become self-employed entrepreneurs, who's going to clean the streets and attend to the sewers and make sure the electricity stations run and things like that? Right. So there needs to be a balance. Certainly we need to, in all cases, we need to pay people who work for the benefit of the public. They need to be paid well and rewarded, obviously. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it's the nature of the individual that you know as well as I do. If you come up with a nice chart that's based around Capricorn and Taurus and Cancer, then they're going to be quite stay-at-home, cuddly, go and get a nice job, look after the family, nice and easy. Where if you get a Uranus-Mercury chart with lots of Scorpio and Sagittarius next to each other, it's going to be much more dynamic and self-motivated to go and make something happen. Every chart's different, but generally, the idea of giving people the power to make the choice for themselves rather than just, well, red pill, blue pill, isn't it?
Yeah.
Astrology is about giving people the choice. And, you know, a lot of them do take, okay, I'm going to go and get married. I'm going to settle down and have 2.2 kids and a mortgage and a car and a job because it's safe. And no blame, no, nothing wrong with that. And then they say, I've had a few of them come up and say, would you take our child as an apprentice one day? And I'll say, well, yeah, but once you start, you can never stop. And it's better not to start unless you're absolutely sure, because you can't unlearn. And some of the things you get to know, you really don't want to know. Mm-hmm.
That is true. That is true. Well, one of my favorite parts of your channel, and in closing here, you always say, you know, these are the ones that are being hit right now, you know, and you give us the different degrees and stuff. Can we close with who's being hit and who's being not hit right now?
Yeah, well, that should be fairly simple because I only did this a couple of days ago, so I'm fairly well up on it. People born at the end of the first week of April, July, October and January, the end of the first week of these months, they're the ones who are getting absolutely hammered right now. And they're strung out at the end of their tether, about to reach for the razor blade, and I'm going, hang on, another 3 weeks, and the last 2.5 years can be over, put to bed. Both, it's the people born at the start of the second week of July, October, January and April who are on alert because they're the ones whom Uranus is coming to say hello to in the next couple of months. And there's going to be a few changes there, either willingly or kicking and screaming. Over the recent years, Neptune's been really affecting people born in the last 7, 8, 9 days of November and May, August and February. And He's now particularly affecting those born at the very end of those months in a way that is nebulous, fatigue-ridden, and uncertain, but not permanent. In the meantime, Saturn is also now affecting those people born at the very start of Sagittarius and Gemini and Pisces and Virgo. So they're getting hit as well. And it is those people born in the last 10 days of February and May and November and August who are under the most pressure at this time. One of the outcomes of this, I think, when the Saturn-Neptune square comes later this year, is going to be some type of potential for epidemic. So obviously those people who do have a low immune system anyway are strongly advised to up the ante with their vitamins and minerals and fruit and veg and salad. Immune system, big one for later in the year. Jupiter's bringing a lot of growth. You can always rely on him at the end of the day. He always promises more than he delivers. At the end of the day, he always comes through with something. And those people born from perhaps August the 5th, 6th, right the way through then into early Virgo, you can expect the coming 4 or 5 months to be the best time for individual growth and development that there's been since 2003. And that's a long one. That's 12-year cycles. But as I often end with, if I were treating the world as my client and the human species as an organism, bearing in mind I work with Helio as well as Geo, I would be saying that this is it, this moment now. It's the culmination of 2 to 3 years of pressure, which is kind of pushing us in a new direction. And the ones we're pointing at now, the last one of this is 3 years from now. You would have seen this already. 4 years from now, Jupiter conjunct Saturn conjunct Pluto in Capricorn. That's the trigger for the future. Let's get there.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I will be putting Steve's information below for his channel and website, so if you guys want to follow him and check it out, I highly recommend it. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, it's great. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please leave them below, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this fascinating interview. So thanks again, Steve, and have an awesome evening in the UK.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.